By bringing everyone to the table as opposed to the witness stand, we've been able to have frank discussions with privacy officers and executives at companies like Mozilla, Match, Airbnb, Lyft. We're talking about their business practices that they've enacted to build consumer trust beyond what is mandated by law. That signals to me great potential for cooperation between Washington, D.C. and the Silicon Valley. It's an exciting time to be working in tech policy, but I will tell you that we're going to be very busy, extremely busy over the next few years, crafting regulations that are built to keep up with the rapid pace of innovation. If I had it my way, I'd put a renewed focus on creating strong data privacy regulations at the top of everybody's to-do list. There are already a lot of ideas out there, so many in fact, that here in the States, we're on the verge of watching a patchwork of state-level regulations begin to take shape. You all know that nothing good is going to come from that 50 regulators with 50 sets of regulation and 50 different approaches. You all know that nothing is going to be easy when it comes to working through that type patchwork. The GDPR is usually described as a robust framework for data privacy regulation, but when I look at it, I see a few trouble spots there. By now, we all know that complying with the GDPR costs an absolute fortune, and that has presented two problems. One is that bigger companies are happy to comply because that means they can field excellent PR for putting their customers first. But really what they're doing is writing a check and then checking a box. It also creates a barrier to entry for smaller companies and all but freezes out startups. This has actually led to a habit of non-compliance by these smaller companies and startups who would rather risk skirting regulations than allow the Googles and Facebooks of the world to push them out of the marketplace. In reality, what the GDPR gave the European Union is a system that allows mega companies to entrench themselves, protected by cash flow, while smaller companies and startups are either priced out of existence or tempted into a state of non-compliance. I'll tell you, that doesn't sound like a robust framework that's really going to get the job done long term and get that job done for everyone in the ecosystem. In the US, just as in Europe, there is a great demand for transparency. Sometimes this evolving culture of accountability clashes with our status as the world's tech hub. You've all seen it. Startups are looking to move fast and break things, but now they're balancing their own need to innovate with the knowledge that their customers are always watching. The early days of Facebook and Google were the Wild West, but now even less sophisticated customers understand what it means when an advertising company is tracking their behavior online. A few years ago, that Dollar Shave Club ad chasing you between apps would probably have been ignored. Now, it's a red flag. Consumers know somebody's watching. Still, there is nothing that the American consumer craves more than having choice and options. They love it, whether we're talking about breakfast cereal or makeup or smart devices. I will tell you, they won't be pleased if the federal government chooses to regulate those choice and options out of existence. Something I've spent a great deal of time on is figuring out how to protect consumers without making it impossible for small firms to compete. Earlier this year, I introduced the Browser Act in the Senate. This is a bill I've been pushing since my time in the U.S. House, and I believe in it because it sets up a compliance framework that will allow consumers to reclaim control of their data without tying the hands of technology companies. It requires companies to secure an opt-in consent from consumers before collecting sensitive information about a customer's health, finances, or social security number. For less sensitive information, like an IP address, companies will be required to give their customers an opt-out. Companies won't be able to deny service to anyone refusing to waive their right to privacy. But the Federal Trade Commission will apply the rules equally across the entire internet ecosystem, so no one ends up at the disadvantage. Arming tech companies with a guidebook and guidelines and allowing them to sink or swim on their own sets up the best possible scenario for consumers because, first and foremost, under the Browser Act, privacy and transparency is assumed. Once properly implemented, what the customer sees is what the customer will get. It will help consumers regain control over what I term their virtual you. If companies are allowed to set their own policies within reason, it will quickly become apparent to consumers and regulators which companies are making an effort and which companies make a habit of outsmarting their own policies. We saw this a lot with Facebook, for example, and its now infamous privacy control settings that always seem to reset themselves with every update. This made consumers furious because while they may not have understood the algorithms, they fully understood that they had been manipulated by a company now in possession and control of deeply personal information. Consumers had figured out the app they were using was not the product. They, the consumer, were the product. Now, many of the tech companies I've spoken to aren't necessarily enthusiastic about blazing their own trail. Those with enough money and influence would rather be given a list of rules to follow, but I'm not on board with doing that. It is not the federal government's job to police bad customer service. And we have neither the expertise nor the capacity to anticipate innovation. That's the job of the private sector. The way I see it, my job is to create an effective piece of legislation that ensures everyone involved knows what is expected of them. Consumers will no longer have to rely on their own savvy to protect their private data. In a way, they'll become part of a new layer of accountability. When consumers are more engaged, it won't take a massive data breach or a major internal policy leak to get the online public's attention. Instead, we'll all be working within a healthier market and a given set of expectations with a marketplace that is much more aware and more responsive to real-time problems. Making this all happen, of course, is going to be a massive undertaking. It is going to take the best efforts of lawmakers and of industry. It is going to require consumer participation and for them to weigh in on how they feel rules and regulations would affect them. But that's where gatherings like this come in, and it's also where the Tech Task Force comes in. And I can guarantee you that the only way we get this done is if policymakers do more listening and you all in the private sector and industry do more talking and information sharing with us. Thank you so much for letting me drop in and spend a few moments with you today. I appreciate it. I hope that you will continue to take up, to follow us You're going to find us on Facebook, on Twitter, on YouTube. You're going to find our website, blackburn.senate.gov. Thank you all for your time today.